Thanks, Eric, and echoing Eric's comments at the outset today, I want to thank everyone in the room here today for the good work that you have and energy that you have put into this process, and thank Eric in particular for the stewardship that he's given to this process, and of course our colleagues from Collaborative Economics for their help. Apropos of what we've been talking about here this morning, there's a fair amount of intersection that's already taken place. What we've discovered as the process evolved, and for those of you who are not familiar with the Climate Prosperity Project itself, it grew out of a series of retreats that the Rockefeller Brothers Fund, Michael Northrup, who is the lead person at Rockefeller nationally in sustainability, has funded a whole host of things with which many of you are familiar in the civic arena, convened a group of about 25 of us back in 2008, late 2007, early 2008. We didn't quite know why we were there. It was kind of a cool place, a little retreat outside of New York called Peconico Hills. This is the old Rockefeller estate. And about half of that group were people who led national environmental organizations, Environmental Defense Fund, Natural Resources Defense Council, World Wildlife Fund, and so on. And the other half of us were economic developers who all said to ourselves, what are we doing here? Because it was not the interaction that many of the economic development people had over time had been in an adversarial setting with many of the organizations because of conflicts around development. And what emerged over a period of time, over about a year, with Michael convening the group, was a common ground of the intersection of dealing with the climate issue, acknowledging it as a challenge, but also seeing the climate issue as an opportunity, which in many ways, a lot of what we've been talking about here today represents it, can be an economic opportunity. The whole cluster around which we're organizing in our own community is being pursued around the country in various economic development ways. What emerged out of all of that with Rockefeller's initial and continuing support was a national 501c3 organization called Climate Prosperity, Inc. And as it came together, we put together a board that represents a cross-section of the kind of disciplines that were in those retreats, and national leaders, in the head of the International Economic Development Council, the head of the American Chamber of Commerce, executives, people involved in the entrepreneurial dimension of environmental issues, head of Governing Magazine, Neil Pierce from the Washington Post, etc. And early on, Rockefeller wanted to test the concepts that were emerging in the Climate Prosperity Project, and decided to identify a number of pilots. I think we identified initially 8 potential pilots. The 4 that emerged over a period of about a year where traction really developed were the ones that we talked about here, Denver, Portland, Silicon Valley, and St. Louis. I made the point early on in the process that while it was certainly very relevant to demonstrating the viability of the concept to look to communities that traditionally had been thought of as leaders, such as Silicon Valley and Denver, it would also be useful to identify communities that maybe have not been identified historically, such as ourselves in Cleveland and Detroit, Chicago, and Midwestern communities where the dynamics around energy are quite different. And in that process, Cleveland and St. Louis were in the initial list of prospective pilots. And I think what we've discovered in this process is that while we sometimes compete with Denver and Portland and Silicon Valley in economic development, more often than not, there's room for collaboration. And the spirit of the groups within the program have been very collegial. We've learned a lot because Silicon Valley with a lot of leadership by Doug and John and Tracy as technical support to our counterpart organization there, Joint Venture Silicon Valley. They have been doing these endeavors for a longer period of time, and they've been willing to share. So a lot of that cross connection between the pilots has been useful. Much of what Eric has put forward, I think, in this process has benefited from that. We did this on a pure volunteer basis with technical support from Collaborative Economics for the first year that we were up and running as a national C3, and we ultimately decided to make a permanent organization with a staff director, and we had the good fortune in that process of enlisting, and timing is everything, one of our colleagues in the process to serve in that role. We did a national search, and out of that search, we were pleased that Andre Pettigrew was willing to take on this assignment. As we referenced earlier, he has a terrific background leading up to his current role as Executive Director of the Climate Prosperity Project. Most recently as the Cabinet Head of Economic Development for then Mayor John Hickenlooper, now Governor John Hickenlooper, who was recently elected Governor of Colorado. And the portfolio that Andre led for Denver included a pretty comprehensive package of both traditional economic development, entrepreneurial development, workforce, the talent issues. So he brings a great experience as a practitioner in this process, and has really had some real success under his leadership, and then Governor Bill Ritter and Mayor Hickenlooper in applying what is the kind of the theory behind climate prosperity. His experience beyond that, as we discovered vividly last night with Michelle Rhee as the speaker at the speaker series. He was her first client when she went out as an expert consultant when he was deputy superintendent of the Denver public school system, and prior to that had been in Governor Roy Romer's cabinet in Colorado, was with the Boulder Chamber in economic development, grew up in Detroit, migrated to California. He's too modest to have this on his resume. He played on John Wooden's last UCLA basketball team. He's quick to point out he didn't start, but just being there is kind of pretty cool. But in San Francisco, had a lot of background in the entrepreneurial development side of economic development. So we thought, since he has been a tremendous resource to each of the four pilots as the Greenprint efforts have gone forward, since he was going to be here working informally with us in the course of the day today, that we'd ask him to share some of his observations coming from one of the communities and now working in the role of executive director for the overall program, some initiatives that are underway, some things that are in the planning stages, the design lab, which I ask him to touch on, and we had a revisit with a number of the folks that were involved in the original Peconico meetings in March, and to that we added a whole cadre of national corporate leaders, the CH2M Hills and the Citicorp and the largest home builder in the country, and the energy around that has produced some very interesting directions that climate prosperity is now contemplating. So with that, I'll ask Andre to share some of those perspectives with us and kind of tie in maybe some of the things he's heard here today. So please welcome Andre Pettigrew.
Around this country, communities all over the country are beginning to wrestle with this issue of resurgence, how to rebuild your local economy, and it's been quite interesting to me that sustainability, the clean economy has been a real reference and focal point around the work. Now, I think both Dick and Eric have done a great job here in St. Louis. I think, Dick was a little modest in how St. Louis got involved in this. Yes, there were 8 communities picked, and people said, what was the science? There was no science, it was all art in terms of deciding who would be involved. I mean, it really was about who was willing to sort of step up and organize the critical mass to take on this effort. This is not a project per se. This is really about how communities are organizing themselves around an economic transformation that is literally going on around the world. St. Louis is an unusual suspect. And as I speak nationally about the work that is going on in the climate prosperity, it goes without exception that people will stop and say, St. Louis? Tell me about St. Louis. I mean, they kind of get the other 3. And so, I think, once again, Dick's willingness to step up and be a part of the Climate Prosperity Project, and Eric's leadership in terms of providing the detail and keeping this on momentum is really an important part of the St. Louis work. And, once again, I was, managing the local program in Denver, making sure that it became regional, and so I, was less aware of what it meant to have a St. Louis in this, but it really is important to have a St. Louis in it because, a lot of people think that, Silicon Valley is so far ahead, we can't do that. And Portland, well, they're green, and Denver, them. Oh, but if St. Louis can do it, then maybe we can. And I don't want to understate how important that last statement is. The national conversation around how we use the environment, climate action as an economic opportunity as opposed to a regulatory drag on our economy is a very important conversation. The conversation in America, and actually globally, is about how these efforts will generate jobs, new markets, a more competitive business, energy independence. This is the language that is resonating throughout the country around this work. My soundbite on this is saving the planet now makes dollars and cents. It may have always made sense, as professed by our environmental movement throughout the country. The environmental movement has been around for probably all of our professional careers. I mean, EPA just celebrated its 40th anniversary, and so there's been a focus on this. But what has accelerated the adoption rate and the understanding are the opportunities that are brought about by business. Businesses are demonstrating through energy efficiency, and your Green Business Challenge is one of those examples, that they can reduce their cost of doing business. And if you're able to reduce your cost of doing business, you're able to be that much more competitive in a very price-sensitive marketplace today. Price matters. And so these Green Business Challenges, these efforts to get business to focus in on how they can reduce their energy costs, their use of resources, and this is bigger than energy, become a very important focal point around the work. I think the first big one was started in Chicago, but this movement is really important. And there are a whole host of other derivatives that come out of a Green Business Challenge. Once again, the whole knowledge sharing and the competition, getting people engaged is a very important one of it. But also the level of innovation. So we talked about the university research innovation marketplace. And once again, being in Colorado where we have over 14 federal labs, a great university system, know a little bit about tech transfer, commercialization, and the challenges of being able to make that ecosystem work efficiently. Well, Green Business Challenges are creating a marketplace that allows innovators to be more closely tied to the markets. And so we think these demonstration projects where businesses are trying to figure out what's the right materials, how to retrofit, is generating a better understanding for the research labs and the universities. But it's also helping inform innovative entrepreneurial companies, because the distance from the market is far shorter than the research that's done in a pure science research basis in a university. And so the ability to have these demonstration projects become very critical. And I know that you're about to go into your third iteration of this. It's growing and you're providing more information, and it's a model that people are, well, you know, once again, St. Louis can do that, well, maybe we can do that. And it's vital to providing the educational and the awareness infrastructure that's required to grow the market. It's critical that this be business-led. So over in the marketplace discussion, someone says, well, I think that business should be involved, and someone said, no, I think business should lead. It is important that business be the leadership face on this issue. It's critical. Research, development, tech transfer, acquisition, major company, 500 jobs. That is the model. That is the climate prosperity model that is local, that now grows national, and clearly this is a product and service that's a manufacturing product that has the potential to be sold literally all over the world. And so to me, being able to understand, and we heard this word earlier, this ecosystem, this set of players and actors who are so all emerging around a new set of ideas to identify new innovations, new markets, new company relations, strategic relations, is really an important part. You are in fact building your next economy. You're building the level of resiliency that is going to be required in every economy. And once again, we're doing this through this clean economy, clean economic model. The Greenprints are serving as that sort of vision, that focal point, that communications document that bring resources and ideas together. I mean, people say, well, it's just a plan. Well, I'm like Eisenhower about the whole thing. It's not about the plan, it's about the plan, and the set of relationships and the understanding that comes out of the plan. The plan becomes the document that communicates. It becomes the self-referencing guide that you measure success, how well you're doing. It's how you modify it. Your Greenprint is setting out the priorities that this community wants to rally behind and go after. So once again, the Greenprint, the thinking, the ecosystem refinement are things that we think, once again, potentially differentiates St. Louis. It differentiates the other climate prosperity communities. But I will also tell you, as I said, I'm attending a number of meetings and having a whole host of discussions. Other communities are realizing the importance of this work. So I will conclude, and maybe take a few questions, but I will conclude by saying the work that you're doing, I mean, there is a real method to this sort of messy madness that seems like, well, where did this all go? How did it all fit? It's fitting. Your colleagues in Portland, Denver, and Silicon Valley, I think, have moved this along and it's calculated into their business strategy as they go forward. I think that same opportunity is available for St. Louis, and like I said earlier, I think the St. Louis story will make a greater difference nationally than